It's Christiana Gaudet, tarotbychristiana.com, and I'm here with more answers to your questions about tarot. Today's question is a simple one. People ask me this question all the time. The question is, with all the tarot decks from which to choose, what deck do I recommend for beginners? Many times people will say, just buy the deck you feel drawn to. That will be the right deck for you. Wow, that's a lot like buying a stove because you like the color of it and not worrying about whether it's gas or electric or will fit in your kitchen. Yes, as you choose a deck, there will be many opportunities to be guided between this and this. And that will be intuitive, and that will be based on your tastes, on what you feel drawn to on a creative level, on a spiritual level, on an artistic level. But you need to educate yourself just a little bit about tarot so you can make a good decision. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a deck of pretty cards that you don't know how to work with. The first thing we have to talk about is tarot traditions. There are a few different tarot traditions, and there are some decks that really are their own tradition, their own thing. If you really want to work with a deck that is its own tradition, that is outside of the, say, 3 typical tarot traditions, and we'll talk about them in a minute. If you really want to use a deck that is its own tradition, you can. You can start with that. There are some people who divide tarot into beginner's decks and advanced decks. The beginner's decks would be the decks that are seen as typical or traditional. The decks that introduce their own systems would be seen more as advanced decks. I think that if you want to start with a deck that is its own system, I think you can. Just make sure you work with a book that is designed for that system, and you memorize that system and learn that system as its own tradition. The downside is that you will not easily be able to switch to another tarot deck without learning a new tradition. And you may, in learning a very specific tarot system, you may miss some of the basics in your tarot education. You can remedy that later if you want.
Here are some examples of tarot decks that might be considered advanced decks that really utilize their own system. This is the Tarot of Transformation. You can see that the keywords are very non-traditional, as are the images. It would be hard to learn a deck like this and then pick up a weight deck and just read with it. But if you wanted to read with a deck like this, all you would have to do is study the book that comes with the deck and learn it as its own system. Likewise, this is Mother Peace. Arguably, Mother Peace is a little more closely related with both Waite and Crowley. But even so, the images are somewhat different, and the message of the deck, being one of the first feminist decks. Here's another example. This is Lisa Hunt's Animals Divine. Beautiful deck, but the images are so different from the standard Waite or Crowley images, and each image expresses an archetype. Each image expresses the archetype of the card from the perspective of the artist. So again, if you want to study this deck or a deck like it, use the book that comes with it and recognize that you are learning a very unique tarot deck. Here we see examples of the world's 3 most prominent tarot traditions. You're probably familiar with this plaid background. This, of course, is the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Comes in the yellow box. This was my very first tarot deck. You can see how old it is. But I think it's a lot of people's very first deck. Now, this is the most popular deck in the world. Many people will tell you that the Waite tradition is the tradition that you want to start with. You could start with a deck like this, or you could choose one of the many different editions that have different backs, different coloring, like the Universal Waite or the Radiant. There are also many Waite clones or decks that are inspired by Waite, including Robin Wood, Hanson Roberts, and Morgan Greer. Now, this is the Crowley Harris deck, the Thoth Tarot. Very beautiful deck, but you can see that the images are very different. The card names, in some cases, are very different. The minor arcana cards have keywords on them, and the interpretations on the cards are somewhat different. The Crowley deck, by tradition, doesn't use reversals, and as you can see, the back is not reversible. There are people who read both Waite and Crowley. It's very possible to do that. But if you choose a deck, you want to know which tradition it follows. And if you've started studying one deck, recognize that if you switch to the other, there will be some differences. Now, the oldest tarot tradition, of course, is the Marseille deck. In the Marseille deck, the pips are illustrated only with the appropriate number of suit icons. People who prefer to read with the Marseille deck find that the lack of illustrations opens up their intuition and allows them greater freedom in their interpretations.
And so there are some things to consider. Would you prefer to work with a deck that is its own system or its own tradition? Do you prefer a Waite deck or a Waite-based deck, a Crowley deck or a Marseille deck? If you're going to be working with a particular teacher, it's always a good idea to ask that teacher what they recommend. Over time, another thing you'll want to consider is that the more we study different tarot decks, the more we come to understand tarot as a whole. When we are able to compare decks one to another, we are able to see the different ways the archetypes are expressed. So, as a beginner, you may want to start with one tradition and get solid there. But over time, you may want to expand and compare different decks one to another, learning different traditions. Now, if you choose to go with the very popular Waite tradition, you'll also have the option of getting tarot cards that have quite lengthy card interpretations printed right on them. Quick and Easy Tarot is an example of that. Tell Me Tarot is another example. I have to say that I don't really approve of these kinds of decks, and that's for 2 reasons. Number one, I think having the interpretations printed on the card can limit our understanding of the card and can keep us from digging deeply within ourselves to figure out what the card means to us. I also think it can discourage us from memorizing the card and really getting to know the card because the interpretation is printed right on it. That being said, I do know some tarot students who really moved forward in learning their cards and in memorizing their cards with the aid of this kind of a deck. So if you think you're the kind of student that would appreciate a deck with interpretations printed on each card, go ahead and give it a try, but make sure that you have another deck that you can use when you get ready to read for the public. I hope you found this helpful, and if you are just beginning your tarot journey, welcome. Your life will never be the same. If you have a question about tarot, please send me an email.